We were just speaking about the death of one person, and it's really interesting because in the countries like Libya, Syria, Iraq and Yemen, there have been deaths in the thousands, and many are going unreported. Now, today we wanted to focus on Syria as promised, and the situation is literally just, the violence is escalating, and it's really, really horrendous. It's been going on for how long?
It's been 6 weeks now since the protests have started, and they didn't start off very strongly. I mean, the people showing up weren't that many in number, but it's been building up over the weeks. And the more it builds up, the more, there's been crackdowns, and there's heaps of leaked videos of violence. But, I think the thing that interests me or intrigues me the most about Syria is the conflicting reports you get. Some people you speak to will tell you, oh, no, we've spoken to friends and family in Syria, and they say that, it's just sectarian issues. People are just arguing amongst each other and causing this violence, but it's not really the government. And yet you get all these news reports that are saying, no, military units are being used, and it really is the government against the people. So it seems hard to identify exactly what is happening, but at the end of the day, there are heaps of people dying, and obviously the people being detained are detained by the government because it's not random.
To elaborate what you're saying further, for example, according to official statistics, to date, 2,843 people have been detained, okay? And many say that this number is actually close to 8,000. So obviously the discrepancy between these two numbers shows, so what is the reality? And it's really interesting because these detainees, some of them are actually being tortured. 30 activists have actually been released to date, and some have actually spoken of brutal torture. And this is really horrific because, this is going unreported, and having, detainees up in the thousands is just really worrying. It's become, a crackdown.
And it's the type of people being detained as well. I mean, there's heaps of the protesters, actually students protesting in their universities, doing sit-ins, the faculty of economics, architecture, and the list goes on. Anyway, these people are being detained for peaceful protests, like they didn't actually commit any violence. Another type of people kind of being detained are those bloggers and tweeters who actually use their real names. So then there was like a message going out saying, oh, people, don't use your real name, otherwise you'll never be seen or heard from again. And then you have someone like Dorothy Paravaz, who is the Al Jazeera correspondent who was sent to Syria. She was arrested on her arrival there, and hasn't been seen or heard of since the 6 days ago that she was detained on. So,
and it's interesting because she's actually got Iranian, Canadian and American passports. And you think, what are these countries doing about it? It's just really, really horrific.
Well, in terms of what countries are doing about it, I think this country of all in the Middle East is the one that invited the quickest reaction from Western forces. Like the US was straight away condemning what happened and saying, no, you know what, you got to stop this, to the president. And Australia quickly escalated its travel warning from, do not travel to Syria to, if you're in Syria, get out of there.
Yeah, but okay, fair enough. They're giving him oral,
Yeah, I understand it's not tangible action.
No, definitely. I think that if anything, the example of Libya has freaked the world out. Even those who were supporting the NATO intervention in the first place now realize what, a load of blah that was. It's interesting to note that the UN chief actually rang up by telephone Assad to tell him basically the crackdown is unacceptable. But that kind of seems to be the extent that it's going in terms of international relations and things like that. So obviously the death of Osama has obviously overshadowed the events in this region.
And I think that, like Syria, as opposed to the other countries, not necessarily on extremely friendly terms with Western forces.
Yeah. But it's interesting because, not interesting, it's horrific because, for example, 40 tanks and military enforcements were actually sent in today to the city of Nawa, which is actually near the massacre that happened in Daraa, I think. So it's not that, it doesn't warrant the protests and happenings there don't warrant coverage, but it's just really interesting to see that what has been done.
No, and I think another thing that's completely horrific is the way that they're blocking medical aid from reaching certain areas. Like there is this one person who was saying on Twitter that their auntie passed away last night, and they didn't allow the ambulance to carry that was carrying her body to enter into a city called Tal until a full inspection was conducted. Like, she passed away. What more do you want to investigate? And people are being checkpoints are set out. Security forces are stopping and searching cars, matching IDs with lists of names of young men that are wanted. So, that's completely understandable then that people tell you that we think that detainees are closer to 8,000 rather than the official figures.
Not just that, the methods of detaining people. What were you saying earlier, Miran, about when they round up people? Did he promised to lift the emergency laws, but in terms of policy,
no, and he did actually lift them, but the interesting thing with that is by lifting the emergency laws, people are now allowed to protest, but you have to apply for a permission, right? So you apply for permission and you get rejected either way. So, or even if you get accepted, and you're allowed to go ahead with a protest, there's a crackdown straight away. So it really hasn't done much. And I think it's the people of Syria have been trying to maneuver ways of actually getting out there and protesting. So, for example, there will be a pro-government protest and people will be chanting for the government, for the president. And, there'll be anti-government people standing amongst them also chanting for the president. And then when there's enough people, 100 plus people at the protest, those anti-government people will start chanting things like down with the government, and that way they've got heaps of people and the chant catches on. But then obviously crackdown will happen again
and they'll get detained.
But it's just a way of getting away with being able to protest.
Because even online, as you were mentioning earlier, there have been reports of Facebook going down in some, not all the country, but in some areas. So it's literally if you're in there, what are you going to do? You can't protest physically. You're going to get arrested. You can't protest online. You're going to get detained.
I think it's so scary. They use fire ammunition, to fire at
tanks, live ammunition,
at the students protesting in universities.
Not just that, I think it was it last week when there was that video released on YouTube of a tank running some children over, and it was just totally horrific. It's a total massacre of. I understand if there were armed, protesters or something like what's happening in Libya. But children, seriously?
Yeah, no, but the protesters, they keep chanting Silmiya, Silmiya, which means in peace. They're trying to protest in peace. They haven't made any violent gestures for them to invite a violent reaction. And I mean, Daraa especially is the city in Syria that is suffering a lot. It's been besieged, for over 10 days, and you can't get food and medication into the city. You can't get sick people out of the city. It's just the situation's really horrific. But like we were saying earlier, it's because we're not there, and it's really hard to find out anything that is happening in Syria because it's such a closed kind of place in terms of information
and not just that
transfer.
People feel I've spoken to a couple of people that kind of were in Australia, they're Australian citizens, and they tell you things by whispering it.
Yeah.
And you're dude, what are you afraid of? So definitely, our audience out there, if someone has more information about what's happening in Syria, has family, or has anything else, get onto our Facebook page and let us know, because I think definitely it's a human atrocity that's happening there, and we really need to raise awareness, and hopefully something can be done about it.
What we do know, however, is one of our Facebook listeners has informed us there is going to be a protest on Sunday, the 8th of May, for Syria, and protest will be between 12 to 3 p.m. in Hyde Park in front of St. James Station. So if you want to support the oppressed people of Syria, I'm just quoting off the event here, if you want to go and support their cause, then Sunday, May 8th, 12 to 3 p.m. at Hyde Park.
That brings us to the end of the news segment for this week. I think we did cover two major events that have been very, very prominent in the last week. But as we promised, the surprise is in the next segment. So stay tuned. You're listening to The Y Factor on 87.6 FM.